Another topic I wrote about, and I don't believe I've recorded, was the fact that, except for my father, all the men who had been planted in my life, and I do mean planted, had their origins in London. Perhaps not some of the earlier plants, I might say. A man called Georgie, when I was 17, was not from London. But as far as I know, he was not involved in the right. He was, however, involved with my father. And had a penchant, oh dear, my French pronunciation, for school uniforms. Doesn't mean he interfered with actual schoolgirls. Nonetheless, okay, he enacted it harmlessly. But some possible pedophile tendencies there. And some definite homosexual ones, as a matter of fact, so hey, I don't know. Right, the men in the porn ring. The men in my life after I left my parents' nest. I'm not doing that very well either. My parents' nest. Not in a good mood today. Right, my husband, born in Erith. Okay, so that's Ken, Greater London. Ken Browning, born in Lambeth. Edmund Hutter, born in Kensington. Greg Byworth was from somewhere or another in London. Not that I was ever personally involved with him. If I could possibly avoid him, and I did. However, he was involved, as I've said, with Ken and with my husband. And with my father. And what I eventually noticed was all of these men who were introduced into my life had gravitated from London and strung themselves out along the coast. Ken, for example, had moved to Pagham, which is near Bognor Regis. Some people said, "Where the hell is Pagham?" Well, I will never forget it, and I will never return, definitely now, but I wouldn't have wanted to. There are places I would have wanted to go back to, but not Pagham. Ken was in Portchester. Ken was in Pagham. Edmund was in Portchester. My husband was, of course, in Southampton. All along the coast. Another little oddity that I haven't gone into at all is that I eventually discovered links between my girlfriend Chris's husband and my husband. Very strange indeed. She lived in Bournemouth. Okay, from London, strung out along the coast, and then a huge, huge connection to the Isle of Wight. I forget the exact dimensions of the Isle of Wight. What is it, 12 miles by 9 miles? Less than that. It's a tiny, tiny island where I have found many connections, completely independently of anything David Icke has to say. I doubt if he's heard of the connections I have there. But if he has, he should be aware of them. Notably any bloody family called Byworth. Or any family with the surname Cornelius. That's a good one to avoid as well. Or any family with the surname Kindle, Kindell. Another excellent one to avoid, and all connected to the Isle of Wight. That list is considerably longer, but leave it there. Now, the other thing I noticed, of course, was that all of my life, and funnily enough, apart from my nearly 7-year stretch in the Brecon Beacons, and that was only 14 miles from the sea, I've spent my entire life living around the coast of the UK. If I believe the order of events, starting in Newcastle on Tyne, then to Peterlee, then to Southampton, and of course in Wales a great deal of my time in Ceredigion, including both Newquay, Aberarron. Anyway, as far as I'm aware, I do not have. I was about to say I do not have anything to do with the pawn ring. I do, because I'm chasing them, and I rather suspect they're chasing me, which I should have expected, of course. I mean, how extraordinary is it that Greg Byworth turned up in Annislas, just north of Borth, where my dog Flossie is buried. And then in Llandysor, which is only a few miles from where I am now. And at one time my husband, roughly at the time, in fact, that Greg Byworth must have moved to Wales, my husband was wanting to move to North Wales, wound up in Cornwall instead. Anyway, coastline. Now, if you want to take pornographic pictures of a child, the ideal place to do it is on the coast, on a beach. What do you find on beaches? You find children running around naked, or in very little clothing, which to a paedophile is exactly the same as a naked woman, or a woman in very little clothing. Exactly the same. And whenever I see old men sitting on their own, overlooking beaches, with cameras, I get deeply suspicious. Or any men on their own with cameras overlooking beaches. I can remember one man down at Newquay, for example, where there is a perfect view of the South Beach from benches. And he was sat there on his own, taking photographs. Little kids running around naked. I looked at him. He saw me looking and waved at some family who did not respond. Parents, beware. They are always around. Beaches, ideal for a paedophile. This, of course, is before the age of the internet. Now, paedophiles can download images of naked children anytime they like, or near naked children. But the other thing about coasts, especially Newcastle and Southampton, of course, back in the good old days, before the internet, was that they had cross-channel ferries, international ferries. And in my book I included a long piece about Holland, namely Zandvoort and Scheveningen, only to discover that they have actually come up in connection with paedophile rings. I did not know that for a certainty at the time that I wrote about their possibilities. I was only joining the dots at the time. We British, on a whole series of islands. And unfortunately, that must have involved, a lot over the centuries, has involved, very definitely, a great deal of inbreeding. And a great deal of inbreeding with satanic families. Paedophilic satanic families. But islands are, of course, are surrounded by water. There are little coves everywhere. There are coves, where boats can come in completely unnoticed, carrying anything at all. Anything. Children, child porn, drugs, you name it. All of this I had concluded, as I say, in the book. So I uploaded to the Ether in 2009, and possibly again, I think, in early 2010, after which the whole world came down on me like a ton of bricks for the last 6 years, that is.